Hey guys, and welcome back to the Spruce and Linen channel. I'm Janelle, and today we are going to talk about merino wool roving. So if you missed it, we now have 25 colors and a few more on their way of merino wool roving available in the Spruce and Linen shop, and I'm so excited. It's been so long coming. I've been wanting to have this in the shop, and so you'll have to go check it out. Tons of beautiful colors. And today we're going to just kind of do a little crash course in using merino wool roving in your weavings. And I mean other wool roving too. The other one I like to use is Corriedale, and I'll have a little bit of that in the shop soon too. So let's jump right in. Okay, so the first thing we are going to talk about is the name of this. I call this merino wool roving. You might also see it called combed sliver or wool tops and that kind of thing. I like to call it merino wool roving, and when it's merino, this is merino, which just refers to the sheep, and it's beautiful. It's a lovely wool, and it's just unspun wool fiber essentially. So when you're buying wool roving, you'll probably notice that a lot of shops have a 19 micron or 22.5 micron or 23 micron. And this refers to the fineness of the wool. So the lower that micron number, the finer the wool. Most of the wool I have in my shop is 19, and it is beautifully and wonderfully soft. And generally speaking, most merino wool out there that I've seen is generally between 19 microns and like 23. But they do go lower. I've seen 16, and I've seen a little bit higher too. But I love 19 micron, and I love kind of that general kind of average range, which again 19 to about 23. The thing that's great about merino, which is just like the type of sheep, is it has a very long staple. So a staple is like a tuft of wool, kind of like this. And you can see just how long this is, and this kind of makes it a stronger wool. So if I put my hands really close together and I pull with all my might, and I'm pulling as hard as I can, it's not coming apart. And that has to do with the length. Now, if it had a really short staple, it would come apart very easily. But you can see here with it being longer, let's just pull off a piece here. I'm gonna measure it out so I don't waste any. We'll go about there. So if you put your hands nice and far apart, you can kind of gently pull slowly, and it'll just kind of release and give you this feathered edge. And that is how you kind of pull pieces off of a big ball like this. You don't need to use scissors, and I wouldn't really recommend using scissors for it either. So now we've got a little piece off, and today I'm going to show you the 3 ways I use merino wool roving in my weaving the most. There's tons of different ways you can use it. You know, we've shown you how to use it to make a flower, and you can kind of use it just like yarn. It's just a little bit more dainty than yarn. But I'll show you the 3 ways I love most, and you have seen them scattered throughout our tutorials before, but this is kind of going to be the hub of using merino in your weaving. So another note about using raw wool: this is 100% wool. So this is nothing like the acrylic versions you may have seen out there. I'm not a huge fan of those. They work, but they don't obviously have the same kind of structure as a natural fiber does. And one thing to note, most importantly about raw wool like this, is that, and sorry, not raw wool, but unspun wool, is that this will felt if you handle it too much. So if I were to sit here and just kind of do this over and over again, this will eventually turn to felt, and especially when it's such a fine micron, I find it does it even faster. So you want to be really gentle and careful when you're using roving. So I'm going to do a sumac stitch here, and what I like to do when I'm working on a small weaving like this, you can use the full thickness or you can split it apart. So I'm going to just kind of lay this out in front of me here, and I'm going to kind of look for like the natural place that it seems like it might split. And to me, it looks like right about there. Looks pretty good. It's not going to be perfect, and it's already not perfect. But I'm just going to kind of gently split it apart. Again, work slowly and gently with your wool. And see, it's not splitting quite as nicely, so I'm gonna try to help it along a little bit, and there we go. See, now it's splitting quite nicely. So now I'm working with a half thickness of the wool, and again, you can split this even further, which we'll do in a little bit here. But it's very versatile. I like to work with small-ish pieces. You wouldn't want to try to split this whole thing at once. Like you could, but it'd be a lot of work. And we're gonna do a sumac stitch here. So I like to go over 2 and skip 2 when I'm doing a sumac stitch with wool roving like this, because it is quite puffy, so you kind of want to leave some space. And while I'm doing this, you'll notice I'll kind of let it twist a little bit. So I'm going to skip those 2 strings, and I'm going to go around this next one. See, and when you kind of twist it like that, it gives it a nice finish there. And this is just like a very basic stitch that I've shown you guys before, but I love using merino for this. It just adds so much texture and it's so pretty. So I'm gonna just continue across, again, letting it kind of twist as I go. And now we have like a half sumac there. So then I'm gonna take the other half, and to switch this up from what I've shown you before, I'm going to purposefully actually stagger the rows. So instead of lining them up on the same strings as we did the first time, I'm gonna go the strings in between. And this is just a slightly different look. It's pretty similar, obviously. And see, now that I'm going this way, I'm letting it twist this way. So I like to always let it twist up. So you can see when you stagger those rows, it looks a little bit more braid-like and a little less chevron-y. So just a couple different ways you can do that. So before I go and tuck these ends in, what I have found has worked really well for me, and again, it depends on the thickness you're using and all of that, but generally speaking, I find 2.5 to 3 times of where you're putting sumac stitch is about the length that you need for the piece of roving. So you can see here I have quite long tails, so I could have easily just gone 2.5 and that would have been like just giving me just enough tails, but I always like to err on the side of caution and take a little bit more than I need. But generally speaking, that's kind of how I measure it for the space. I do like 2.5 to 3. If I'm working on a really wide space, I like to go 3. But on a smaller space like this, 2.5 would have been more than enough. And while we're here, let's just quickly talk about tucking in roving. I just like to tuck it back in a few rows like this. And this is like the one and only time I use scissors on my roving is after I've tucked in the ends. I never use it to cut it when I'm taking a length. Like I said, I just pull it apart as it naturally wants to pull apart. So for this stitch, it's ultra basic, and I'm just gonna go with plain weave, but I'm going to go over 2, under 2. This is one that I really like, and it basically is very simple, but it provides a neat texture. And this I've used quite a bit in my weaving. And it kind of gives you a bit of like a bubbly look almost. And when you come around the corner there, you can see I kind of let it twist so that it sits on the edge nicely and it's not weirdly twisted the wrong way. And I would say that's something that you're always kind of wanting to do when you're working with roving, is just pay attention, you know, like that doesn't look quite as good. I'm trying to make sure that it's staying straight and untwisted. And again, a super simple stitch, but you can see how like once you squish it down, can we get one more row? I think we can. It is like this nice kind of bubbled texture. And it would be even more emphasized if you used the full thickness. Now for this edge, I was going under these two, but I'm gonna just let it go over one, just so I have a nice edge there to wrap around. And once again, I'm going to flip it over. Sometimes when doing roving, it's nice to have something to lean up your loom against so you're not constantly squishing the front. And same as with the sumac stitch, I'm just kind of tucking in those ends, at least a couple rows in. I'm trying not to pull it too close on the side. Trim off the excess. And then here, you know, it's kind of squished there, so it might be a little bit easier to use a tapestry needle. You can kind of squish this through the hole. We're going to talk about my third and final way that I love to use wool roving. And of course, there are infinite options with this. That's one thing I want to pause and say. You can do raya loops, you could do diamond twill, you know, especially using this method where you're going over a few strings. There's really a lot of stitches you can do with wool roving, and you can treat it like a yarn. You just have to use it a lot more gently than a yarn. So if you're wanting to go over one, under one, like a real plain weave, and you're working on a really big weaving, then I would suggest you use something like a shed stick or a pickup stick. So it basically just opens it up so that you can slide this through without rubbing it so much. And again, like I said, I do like to work in small sections with wool roving. So for this last way, we're going to start this the exact same way we did the one below. So we're just going over two, under two, all the way across. And again, here at the end, I'm just gonna kind of let this go under one, over one, just so that it has something to wrap around later. So for this one, what we're gonna do is we're gonna just start pulling little bunches. And basically we're creating this like even more emphasized texture. And what's nice about this is that you could also pull them at random. So if I started again and I want to pull this one a bunch and maybe leave that one flat and pull this one and do it kind of random, then you can really get funky with the texture. And in between each row of that, I like to put in a row of plain weave just to kind of hold it in place. Maybe I'll even do a couple rows. Especially with the roving being so puffy, it's gonna get covered up by the next row. But I find this is just a good way to tack it down. Another thing that I've seen lately that looks really beautiful is knotting with wool roving. And again, you'd have to be really delicate with the roving to do that, but it's really pretty. So I encourage you just to try things with it, play around. I know that roving isn't always the cheapest material to be using, but if you give yourself, you know, a length and just play around with it and then unweave and just keep trying things, you never know what you'll come up with and what you'll really love to do. I think something really beautiful, like I said, would be a diamond twill with like the full thickness of this on a really big weaving would be so cool, and just having that really large scale would be really unique. So again, I'm just kind of randomly pulling. I'm watching this edge here because I don't necessarily have the most. But can you see how it really starts to add some dimension and texture to the piece. And then I'm going in again with this plain weave. And then if you really squish it down, like so, you can see that unique texture. And these are the 3 ways I love to incorporate wool roving into my weavings. Alright guys, so if you haven't already, go check out the shop. The link is in the description box below, and check out all the beautiful colors I have available with the merino wool roving. And I hope you enjoyed this video. These are the ways that I use most often to incorporate wool roving into my weavings, but let me know in the comments below what your favorite way to incorporate it is. As I said, there's so many other ways than I've shown you today too. You can use it as a fringe, you can use it, like I said, to create raya loops and do flowers, or even just in straight lines. I've seen pile weave done with roving. The possibilities are really endless, so I really encourage you just to play around with it and find a way that you love. If you like this video, please hit that like button, subscribe, and click the bell to get notifications when I post new videos. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. And the camera batteries died because I forgot to check them. I'm gonna try that once more, maybe with this not in the way. And those are my